full blast for the moment going.
I've been Bruno's head writer since the beginning, and it's been a fun ride.
Bruno, can you hear me? Okay, call her dominant and erotic.
Dominant, erotic.
Okay, call her the fastest girl in town.
The fastest gal in town.
Say, you tricky dicky.
Oh, Ingo, you tricky dicky.
You are tingling with pleasure.
I'm tingling with pleasure.
I don't know, a magic ride?
It was like a magic ride.
Okay, guys, what do we have next?
Well, it's the cha-cha.
All right, what are we thinking, people?
Sir, I can say with 89.3% certainty that this dance will involve sensuous desire. 30% chance of an epic tigress unleashing fury on the dance floor.
How would I describe writing for Bruno? It's kind of like writing poetry, but instead of using a pen, you use a bedazzled stick of dynamite.
Okay, you know that wasn't true, right? Oh, man, wow, I'll tell you what. By the way, did you see, anybody else seen that video of the news reporter out in Oakland, California that was talking about the plane crash? Oh my God. That was horrible, wasn't it? Oh my goodness. Anyway, I'll let that go for now. If you haven't seen it, yeah, check it out online. So how many of you would admit to keeping your eyes open during prayer? Oh, nobody's going to admit to that. That's funny. Yeah, I would too. I'd admit to it. You know, some of us keep our eyes open just to see who's got their eyes closed too, right? Yeah, you got to check on that. Make sure everybody's got their eyes closed, you know. How many of you believe that Sunday is, or maybe you were taught or raised to believe that Sunday is a holy day in which you're not supposed to do any work? Anybody raised that way? Yeah, I was too. I was raised that way. You know, and matter of fact, I was raised to believe that working on Sunday was just literally an outright sin, you know, and that people who did work on Sunday were basically ungodly people. At least they didn't have any faith or whatever the case might be. I pastored a church many years ago, and I won't tell you how long ago it's been, but it's been a long time, many years ago, that it was a denominational church, and they believed exactly that. And we had a couple in that church that owned the local cafe. And so, naturally, since they owned a cafe, they had to work on Sunday, or they did work on Sunday, because a lot of people go to the cafe after church on Sunday, you know, eat lunch and those kind of things. You may not understand that in a bigger city, but in small town, that's kind of a big deal, you know. And so, since they were part of the church and all that kind of stuff, and church people, you know, they began to, this little scuttlebutt began to go around, you know, about how those people, if they really trusted God, you know, those that owned that cafe, if they really trusted God, they'd close their cafe on Sunday and just trust the Lord to meet their finances anyway, you know. And matter of fact, they really were getting really kind of on them, you know, and it was making them feel bad and all those kind of things. But you know, the funny thing was that the same people that were complaining about them staying open on Sunday were the same people that went down to the cafe and ate lunch after church on Sunday at that very same cafe, you know. So, okay, all right, well, I think you get the idea. We kind of do that sometimes. You know, so let me just welcome you. This is actually our final week in our series called Unsupervised. And in this series, we've been looking at those times in life when, you know, when we reach the ability, our ability to understand or to comprehend or to process maybe what's going on in our lives. You know, those times when life just kind of reaches around and bites you in the butt, and you wonder what in the world happened, and you don't know what to go, where to do, or what to go, or where to go from there, all those kind of things. It just gets to be kind of a bad thing where you don't know what's happening. And the problem is that when we do that, as I've said before, is that we tend to, if that stays on very long, if that happens for a very long period of time, that we tend to kind of make up our own rules about why that happened and what's going on and what God is like and why He did that to us and all those different kind of things, you know. So we kind of seem to try to make sense of it in the way that we think that we can understand it. And I guarantee you, generally, we are wrong. We're probably on the wrong track. So today we're going to be talking about, like you might have already guessed, working on Sunday. Check this out.
Howdy, Wally.
Andy.
Wally, this here's Mr. Tucker.
Oh, watch your foot. I'm going to rock forward.
Mr. Tucker's car broke down. He needs some mechanical work.
Uh-huh. Where's your car now?
About 2 miles out of town on Highway 43.
Now tell me, what did she sound like before she stopped on you?
Well, choked up, it seemed to me, like I wasn't getting any gas.
He's got gas in the tank, though.
Lots of gas.
Did it sound something like this? First it ran smooth, then it kind of... Then it ran smooth again, then another... Then... Then she dies.
Yes, that's it.
You got yourself a clogged fuel line.
How'd you know that?
From the sound.
Well, you'll fix it for me, then.
Be happy to.
Fine, fine.
Just an hour's work. We'll tow her in tomorrow morning, get right on it. Say, did you see Moon Mullins yet, Andy?
At breakfast.
Now, don't tell me. Let me find her.
Tomorrow morning. I've got to get that car fixed now, today, this minute. I've got to be in Charlotte. Can't you understand that?
I couldn't do it. We're closed on Sunday.
You refuse to help me, then?
Well, if it was an emergency...
It is an emergency.
Mr. Tucker, if...
Yeah, yes. Some of us were probably raised kind of like that. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, to take a day off, to take Sunday off and to rest, you know, those kind of things. But you know what? There's a story in the New Testament about a time when Jesus and his disciples were, which I think they purposely broke the Sabbath. I think they broke the Sabbath on purpose, or at least they ignored what the religious community believed and taught about what a person should or should not be doing on the Sabbath. Several places in the New Testament actually relate this particular story, including Matthew, Mark, and Luke. All three Gospels, of those three Gospels, talk about this same story. So check this out. In Luke chapter 6 and verse 1, it says, "Now it happened that he was passing through," now he, of course, is Jesus, was passing through some grain fields on a Sabbath. Now it specifies that this is a Sabbath day. And his disciples were picking the heads of grain and rubbing them in their hands and eating the grain. How many of you ever done that? Anybody ever done that? Yeah, when I was a kid, and I've done it since then too, when I was a kid, we went to visit my uncle in Kansas, and he had a wheat farm. And during harvest time, he'd grab a handful of that out, put it in his mouth, and start chewing on the wheat, just the raw wheat. And what it does, if you chew it on long enough, it becomes like gum. It just literally becomes like a piece of gum, and it's really, really good. Just a couple of years ago, I did that up near where we live now. There was a wheat field there, and I stopped, and the grain was ready to pick, and I picked a handful of it and chewed on it, and it brought back some good memories. Well, that's what they were doing, not making gum out of it, but they were eating it for the purpose of, because they were hungry, and they were passing through this field on the Sabbath. So as you already know, as you may already know, the Sabbath in Jewish culture begins at sundown on Friday and ends at sundown on Saturday. And that's pretty strict rule as far as that's concerned. And there are a lot of rules and regulations that actually must be kept on the Sabbath in order to keep the Sabbath day holy among the Jewish religion. Excuse me. The fact is, God did say in Exodus chapter 20, when he gave them the Ten Commandments, he said that the Israelites were to remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. He said, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male or your female servant, your cattle or sojourner who stays with you. Excuse me. Well, why? The question is, why were they not supposed to do any work on the Sabbath? Well, because, he says in the next verse, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that was in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. I think blessed is a good word in that particular point, or in that particular verse. We often think about the Sabbath as being one of those things that, you know, it's a rule, it's a regulation. And yet I find that word blessing there, or that he blessed the Sabbath and made it holy, as being a little bit different than that. And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about here today. So what's really interesting about this whole Sabbath day thing among the Jewish nation, among the Jews, is that there is one section in the Talmud, which is really the book of Jewish tradition, that is literally 24 chapters long, and it specifically identifies 39 separate categories of activity that are totally prohibited on the Sabbath. I think I may need to say that again. There are 24 chapters that specifically identify 39 separate categories of activity that are totally prohibited on the Sabbath. Okay. Let me give you some examples. It's kind of interesting. If the Sabbath overtook you as you reached for some food, that would mean that you're reaching for some food when the sun is going down, right? And if the Sabbath overtook you, if the sun went down during the moment that you were reaching for the food was to be dropped before drawing your arm back so that you would not be guilty of carrying a burden on the Sabbath. Yeah. You could not take a bath on the Sabbath. Yeah, boy, as a kid, that'd been awesome, man. Not have to take a bath on Saturday night? Wow, you know? Yeah, well, anyway, no, you could not take a bath. I wish I'd have known that back then. Because you might splash some water on the floor and wash it. That would have been work. I've been labor. I've been working on the Sabbath. You could not move a chair on the Sabbath. Because when you move the chair, you might make a furrow in the ground. That would be plowing on the Sabbath. And women. Women could not look in a mirror on the Sabbath. Oh no, that's true. Women could not look in a mirror on the Sabbath. Why? Because they might see a gray hair and be tempted to pull it. That's fact. Sounds funny to us, I know, but I think it's kind of hilarious. So let me ask you this question. Luke says that Jesus and the disciples were walking through a grain field on the Sabbath day. And even though he doesn't say so directly, I think it's a given. I think he's indicating the fact that, of course, they were traveling on the Sabbath. That's how the last come they were out in a grain field, walking through the grain fields, because they were traveling. I mean, how else could they gotten out in the middle of this grain field if they hadn't been traveling or hadn't been walking? And if they hadn't been walking for a while at least, then how did they become hungry and start picking the grains in the field and eating the grain the grain because they were hungry? Okay, so here's my question then. Wasn't traveling on the Sabbath also prohibited? Well, yes, and I think probably all of you probably already knew that traveling on the Sabbath was specifically prohibited. So let me give you some of the examples that are there. As a matter of fact, according to Talmud, the basic limit for travel was 3,000 feet from your home. Now, I don't know how in the world they decided 3,000 feet was okay and not 2,999, whatever, or 3,001. However, if you had placed some food within 3,000 feet, you could go there to get it because food was considered to be an extension of your house. Okay? On the other hand, you could also place a rope across a street or an alley, and if you did that, well, that would also make the building on the other side an extension of your house as well. Therefore, you could walk across the street, you could travel to that other building. Okay. So, as far as the 3,000-foot rule, too, if you had some food that was placed 3,000 feet away, you could go get the food, and then you could also, it was legal then also, to travel another 3,000 feet from that point. Now, how you got back, I don't know, but, it could get hot and dry out there, man. So what about the picking of the grain? I mean, wasn't that also considered to be working on the Sabbath because you're harvesting grain? Well, actually that depends, because the Talmud says that a Jew could not pull off even a handful of grain on the Sabbath unless he were literally starving. Well, now that's hard to prove, isn't it? So there again, you got a whole bunch of gray area as whether or not you're really hungry enough to warrant the idea that you could pick and eat grain on the Sabbath if you happen to be out there, whatever the case might be. But you know what? I began to wonder, personally, I had this question about, well, this particular incident in the Bible, because I read it again. I was thinking, now wait a minute. What about the morality? What about the morality of picking and eating someone else's food crop? I mean, even if you were hungry, what's the morality in that? I mean, is that okay to pick somebody else's crop just because you happen to be walking through their field? That didn't sound very good to me, because as a matter of fact, I mean, up around where we live, which is 15 miles north of here, but there's thousands of acres of pecan trees up there. And I do mean literally thousands of acres of pecan trees up there. And one of the major problems they have with pecan trees when it come picking time is people that will go into those properties and they will steal pecans, right? So they got signs, and some of them have big fences, and some of them have security guards that drive around in their little trucks all the time, all kinds of stuff to keep people out so that they don't steal the pecans, right? So the same thing, I was thinking the same thing here. Well, what about the disciples, Jesus' disciples? What about the morality of that? They're walking through somebody else's field and they're picking somebody else's food crop. They're stealing grain as far as I'm concerned, you know. Even aside from the whole working on the Sabbath thing, we're talking about a morality issue here. So was it even right or legal or even morally right for them to do this? Well, actually I found the answer is yes, it was. Because in Deuteronomy chapter 23 and verses 24 and 25, I can say that, it says, when you enter your neighbor's vineyard, then you may eat grapes until you are fully satisfied, but you shall not put any in your basket. When you enter your neighbor's standing grain, then you may pluck the heads with your hand, but you shall not wield a sickle in your neighbor's standing grain. That would be considered harvesting. So it was legal in that day and time, at least, to, as you walk through, and I assume it would be here as well, if it was okay for you to walk through somebody else's property, if you found a handful of pecans on the ground, to pick them and eat them as you walked along. But you wouldn't be allowed to bring your bucket with you and sit down under the tree and fill it up, you know, that kind of thing. Okay, that's enough of that. I mean, the reason I've done that and the reason I've gone through all of that is because I hope you're getting the idea. I really wanted you to get a feel for the idea that all the rules and all the regulations that, that must be kept on the Sabbath, all the rules and the regulations that were attached to the Sabbath as far as how to keep it holy and keeping the Sabbath day holy and all those kind of things in that day of time, many of which were directly from God himself. I hope you're getting the idea that the Sabbath was anything but a day of rest. I mean, if we liken that to our day and time, I mean, why is it that when you're driving down the road and you're doing everything that you know is right, you're following all the rules, doing all the stuff, you know, you're got your seatbelt on, you're 2 miles an hour under the speed limit, all those kind of things, you see a cop, your foot automatically comes off of the gas, right? What are you afraid of, right? Because we know that there are lots and lots of things that we don't necessarily know about, you know, that there are lots of things that they can ticket you for anyway. I think I may have told you this once before. We're coming down to Donovan, or down to 478 there, and it was late at night. It was after dark. There was a guy in front of me, and a cop sitting right there beside the stop sign off on the dirt, right? The guy in front of me just kind of rolled up to the stop sign and kept right on rolling and rolled right on through and kept going. So, you know, so I stopped, did my, you know, requisite 2-second or 3-second stop, whatever that is, and I pulled out carefully, and I looked both ways and pulled, and the next thing I know, here come the lights. I thought, yeah, he's going to get that guy. He saw that. He saw him roll through the stop sign. He stopped me. And I rolled down and said, what? You know? Well, your license plate light is out. Really? I was so dumbfounded, I wanted to say, you mean it's okay to roll through a stop sign, but it's not okay to have a light out on your license plate? I don't get it, you know? So I think you understand that if you liken that to the Sabbath back in those days, it really wouldn't matter what you were doing or not doing. Maybe you're breathing too fast, you know. You're panting too hard. Is your heart rate at the right amount? You know, maybe you got 110 instead of 98, you know. The allowable limit is only 100. The Sabbath was anything but a day of rest, man, I'm telling you. It was supposed to be that way and supposed to be designed that way in that sense of the word. But man, I'll tell you what, it just seems kind of crazy. So as we read a moment ago, the Pharisees jumped Jesus out. That's kind of a cowboy term. Jumped his hide, jumped his case, got after him, whatever works for you, you know, got after Jesus for breaking the Sabbath because he was picking grain and eating it as they walked through this particular grain field, whoever it belonged to. As a matter of fact, it says in Matthew 12, verse 2, but when the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, look, your disciples do what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath. Okay, so here's the question. How did the Pharisees know that Jesus and his disciples were traveling through the grain field on the Sabbath? They were far enough from town and far enough from everything, and they became hungry. How did the Pharisees know they were out there if they weren't out there themselves? Already breaking the Sabbath themselves. Well, I assume it's because they were the self-appointed religious police, and they also could temporarily break the rules, you know, in fulfilling their duty. I like this, the bee watcher. Watch the bee watcher. The bee watcher is the first guy in line. The second guy in line is the bee watcher. And the third guy in line is the bee watcher. You know? It's like a denomination I served in for many years. They had committees, and then they had a committee on committees. I think our government does the same thing. I'm going, that kind of makes my brain kind of go into a hum, you know, like electric motor when you plug it in and it doesn't go anywhere. It just, you know, that's the way I feel. I'm going, wow. I mean, wow. And that's what these Pharisees were doing. They were out there watching. They were watching the watchers, making sure that they were doing everything kosher, by the book, all that kind of stuff, you know. Meaning the law, I guess, really didn't apply to them like it did everybody else. I mean, they were keeping their eyes open during prayer just to be sure that everybody else had their eyes closed. And I've told you many times before, and I'm going to tell you again, it's been a long time, so I'm going to tell you again. You know what? Jesus said where two or three are present or together, I am there in their presence. Well, he's there with you as an individual every day anyway. So if he's there, then why do we close our eyes? You know? As a matter of fact, on these Emmaus weekends and stuff that I worked so many times, I get those guys around and I say, listen, guys, this is where it's at. Jesus is here. Why are we closing our eyes? You know, let's keep our eyes open and let's pray. It's a weird thing to do because we've all been taught to close our eyes, you know, close your head and bow your eyes, you know, that kind of thing, and be sure that, you know, and then you got that person that got to keep their eyes open just to be sure that everybody's got their eyes closed, you know. Okay, whatever, you know, it's kind of crazy stuff, but that's kind of what we think. So the question is, how did Jesus handle this accusation then? Because that's really kind of where we're headed. I know it's taken us a while to get there. I'm getting there. How did Jesus respond to their accusation? Well, I can tell you, if it were me, if I were Jesus at that point in time, I'd have said, no, wait a minute. What are you guys doing out here? You know? Aren't you also breaking the law? Huh? You know? So what are you doing accusing me of breaking the law when you're already doing it yourself on the Sabbath? That would have been me. But what you got to know here is, at this point, is that that's not the point. That's not the point. I mean, if you're thinking that the subject of this passage or the lesson that we are supposed to be learning about this incident is about what's right and what's wrong to do on the Sabbath, you know, then we're missing the point altogether, because that's not what it's about. That's not what it's about at all. Well, why not? Well, Because it's not about keeping the Sabbath day holy. It's not what this is about. As though doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath is, you know, if you do that, it will bring down God's judgment upon your life, you know. And it's not about which day of the week God says is holy. Whether it's Sunday or Thursday or Saturday or Wednesday or whatever, you know. Saturday like the Seventh-day Adventists think or believe, or Sunday as most Protestant and Catholic religions believe that Sunday is the day that you're supposed to be worshiping God, you know. And the reason that we do here is because this is the day that most people have off. If the government would change the rules and say, okay, but everybody's going to work from Tuesday to Sunday or whatever, and Monday is the national, basically the day off that everybody. Okay, cool. We'd be here on Monday instead of Sunday. Simple as that. It's not about which day of the week you think is holy or not holy. It's not about, you know, keeping that day so that God is happy, you know. As a matter of fact, so look at what Jesus said in return when he talked to them about this particular issue. He said, well, haven't you read that what David did when he became hungry, and he and his companions? How they entered the house of God and they ate the consecrated bread, which was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those with him, but for the priests alone. Haven't you read about that? So is Jesus condoning going into the church on Sunday morning and eating the communion bread right off the altar? Well, he's saying, listen, guys, I think you missed the point. I think that's what he's saying. So Jesus wasn't actually condoning what's illegal or all those kind of things or immoral like David and his friends did, but you know, I don't know about you, but I've heard some pretty intense hellfire and damnation sermons preached about that particular incident. On the other hand, you know, there's others that try, on this particular incident, there's other preachers that try to explain this away by saying, and I quote, if God makes allowances for his own law to be broken under certain circumstances for the welfare of his people, he surely permits purposeless and foolish man-made traditions to be broken for that purpose. And that's from a very famous preacher, a highly respected one. I'm not going to give his name because I'm not trying to diss anybody. But y'all would know who he is if I told you. Well, I can tell you right off the bat, that's bovine excrement, man. That's all it is. Keeping or breaking the law is not the point here. That's not what Jesus is trying to get across to them. You know, that, well, listen, guys, if you just knew the rules good enough, you'd know that God can break these rules if he thinks it's necessary. But now you better be careful. But you know, so it's knowing which rules you can bend and which rules you can't. That's what it's about. No. It's not about God bending the rules or under certain circumstances, you know, dire circumstances, or as though God is the one who ultimately is that ultimate rule keeper. That's who God is, you know. And he's sometimes gracious enough to let us break the law if the situation warrants. No, that's more bovine excrement is what that is. Because it ain't about the rules. It ain't about the rules, people. So the bottom line is this. Jesus concluded his response to them by saying this. He said, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. What's that mean? What's he talking about there? What's he trying to say? Well, he's telling us it's not about the rules, you know. That it's not about that. All Jesus is saying here is that the reason God created the day of rest to begin with was for us, not himself. Meaning that it's not about God making sure that there is a day in the week when you are forced to worship Him. Would that be worship? No. It'd be like choosing a day of the week when you tell your kids, okay, on this day of the week, you're going to respect me, buddy. And you will do it. And here's the rules. 46 chapters worth of rules, right? And you better know them, every one of them. It's not about the rules at all, not in any way, shape, or form. Now it's obvious that the Pharisees had gotten the idea and gotten all this backwards because they decided that they were made for the Sabbath. That they were the one, that we are made for the Sabbath. That the reason God created the Sabbath was so we would be religiously, legally required by decree of the Ten Commandments and by decree of God's law to worship Him on Sunday on that particular day of the week. And God wanted to be sure that we would worship Him on that day. That wouldn't be worship at all. The kind of worship that most people believe God honors today. It's the same thing. The majority of our world goes to church on Sunday to get their ticket punched. That's fact. I did that for a bazillion years. Because I'm 2 bazillion years old. That's why. And maybe you did too, or maybe you are. Wow. That's a burden. To go to church, get your ticket punched. Whew. Okay, me and God are okay now. Everything's cool. I did what I'm supposed to be doing on Sunday. Everything's fine, no. The writer of Hebrews says this. He expounds on this, this subject by saying this. So there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For the one who has entered His rest, who do you think His is? Jesus' rest. The one who has entered Jesus' rest has himself also rested from his works as God did from His. Wow, that's actually really cool. Because all he's saying there, and what he's talking about there, is that the true Sabbath rest is not a day of the week. Whether it's Saturday or Sunday or Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday or Friday. Pick one. It's not a day of the week. In other words, the Sabbath rest is a person. And His name is Jesus Christ, who has already paid for our sins, past, present, and future, so that the keeping of the law has nothing at all to do with our standing before God. It's not about the rules. It's about a relationship with Him. Whether we keep the Sabbath or don't keep the Sabbath is not even the question. It's about knowing that what Jesus has already done on our behalf, by already having paid for the sins of the whole world, not just ours, not just those of us who have received Him, but as 1 John 2:2 says, the sins of the whole world. Everybody in the world's sins have been forgiven, meaning that their sins are not what's standing between them and God. We think it is. And instead of entering that rest by saying, you know what? Thank you, Jesus, that it's not about the rules. It's about the fact that even when I do sin, and that's every day of the week, I'm still your child. You love me as much as ever. And when I sin so bad that I fall down and skin my knees and break my nose, you pick me up and dust me off and say, you know what? It'll be all right. Let's go on together. Just like you do with your kids. Is God any different? No. Except that God's better. He loves us even more than we could possibly love even our own kids. I didn't know what loving your kids was like until I got a grandkid. Then I realized, how deep that love can be. And that's how God feels about us. He says, It's not about the rules. I'm not trying to force you to worship me once a week whenever it is that you decide that has to be done. It's about realizing that, listen, for all that I've done for you, when you can finally rest in that, you'll run to me. You'll not run away. You'll run to me, not away from me. Why do you think our world runs away from God? Because they think God's about the rules. If they knew that God wasn't about the rules, if they knew that God had already taken care of all the rules and already paid for all the rules and paid for all the sin, they'd be running to him and saying, wow, this is awesome. You mean we don't have to keep the rules anymore? Nope, you sure don't. So that salvation then, to go the final step, is simply about receiving his life within us. By knowing that he is who he says he is. And once we know that, we can rest in him and not in all the rules. Is God awesome or what? God's awesome. Lord bless you all. Amen. Give God a hand.